What's up, everybody? Welcome to the DFS Dose YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about running backs and my running back rankings, which you can find exclusively on the DFS Dose website. And Joey took some time, went through my rankings, and he's going to tell me where I'm wrong, essentially. So before we get into that, Joey, do you want to tell people how they can support the channel, support the podcast?
Obviously, you can support the DFS Dose YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button down below. It's free to do, so just go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And if you like this style of video, slap a like on the video as well. Slap it. And then if you want to listen to the audio version of the DFS Dose, you could find us on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, Podcast Addict, and all podcast platforms at the DFS Dose. So go ahead and search us up on whatever your preferred podcast listening app is, and we're there, and that is the best way to support us, as well as following us on Twitter and Instagram at the DFS Dose.
We do appreciate it, and we have a ton of content coming as soon as football season starts and leading up to it, so you're not going to want to miss any of that. And Joey, let's kick it right off with these running backs, and we'll talk about the top 12 to start, the RB1s, if you will. In order: Christian McCaffrey 1, Saquon Barkley, Zeke Elliott, Alvin Kamara, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, rookie for the KC Chiefs, all the way up at 5. Got Kenyon Drake at 6, Dalvin Cook 7, Derrick Henry 8, Miles Sanders 9, Joe Mixon at 10, and Austin Eckler and Nick Chubb to close things out. What stands out to you on this list?
Yeah, so I mean, you have the pretty standard top 4 guys, which we really don't have to go into depth about because I think those are the consensus top 4 backs in fantasy football, no matter who you ask. So we're just going to go right to number 5, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And that, in my opinion, is too high. So I think he is a running back 1 just due to the opportunity that he has in the Kansas City offense. Obviously, you know, one of the best, if not the best offense in the entire NFL. With Damian Williams opting out, we could project for him to basically have the backfield by himself. But if I were to put him in my rankings, he would sit at the end of the 12, like the 10, 11, 12 range for me personally, because I do prefer some of the guys that you have below him, above him, like Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, and even Miles Sanders. I think should all be ranked above Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And the thing is what I notice is you always preach about not drafting somebody at their ceiling, but you ranked Clyde Edwards-Helaire at his ceiling. That I thought that was funny, right?
Well, wait, I don't have him as the RB1 overall, so he's not at his ceiling.
The running... Okay. Clyde Edwards-Helaire will not finish as the RB1. I think we can all say that. So, out of the top 10 consensus running backs, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire is in the top 10 right now, he is last in speed score out of all top 10 running backs, and he ran below a 4.540 yard dash, and he's below the average weight for a standard RB1. He weighs 207 pounds. Also, Patrick Mahomes checks down at a 3.3% rate. He also has a crazy competition for targets, obviously with Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins, and also McCole Hardman. And then the Chiefs also went out and signed DeAndre Washington, who has a very similar profile to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and he's faster. And then Darrell Williams will also be used at the goal line. So having him at 5 is just putting him at his ceiling. If I were to rank him, like I said, it'd be at 11 or 12. I just don't see any type of way that he finishes top 5 in fantasy and PPR this year.
Well, I think the way is via touchdowns, right? And that's the thing. It's like touchdowns are really hard to project year to year, but when it comes to these running back rankings, and to be clear, my rankings are not median projections, so we'll probably come up with this multiple times, but a lot of the times I'm looking at upside, and I'll prioritize upside. Like, yeah, Derrick Henry and the 300 touches he's going to get is safer than the workload that we can project for a rookie coming into the NFL. But even so, being in this Chiefs offense and with the draft capital he has, and the things that you're saying about DeAndre Washington and Darrell Williams are just, in my opinion, additions for Edwards-Hilaire's stock, because I don't look at those guys as legitimate threats to his workload. So when it comes to Edwards-Hilaire, I think that he's going to just have such a dominant market share. And yeah, you know, Mahomes may not be checking down at the highest clip, but that's okay because Edwards-Hilaire is a dynamic route runner, and all of his receptions aren't going to be, 3-yard dump offs. They're going to be 15-yard down the field wheel routes as he gallops to the end zone ferociously. So I absolutely love Hilaire, and the guys that I've got him above, guys like, Derrick Henry, for example, some of the guys in the lower range, Mixon, Chubb, like they just don't have the receiving upside that Hilaire has, as well as being attached to the best offense in the NFL. So that's the reasoning behind it. I do accept the fact that his median projection is much lower than a lot of these guys, though.
Yeah, so for that reason, I would rank him lower, but I still think he is a top 12 running back in fantasy. But other than that, another name that popped out to me on your list is obviously Dalvin Cook. You don't have him in the top 5, and I also think he should be in the top 5. So he was the number 5 running back last year in PPR, despite only playing 14 games. He had 18 plus carries in 8 games. He ranked 3rd in yards per route run as a running back.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
again, very efficient. Very efficient with the routes run.
Cook also led the league with 21 carries inside the 5-yard line and had 53 catches. I think he'll finish higher than Clyde Edwards-Hilaire and Kenyon Drake. He should be top 5, in my opinion. So why do you have those guys above Dalvin Cook?
Well, Dalvin Cook to me is a player that I do believe is legitimately injury prone, and he gets a knock for that. I mean, he missed 17 games, right? In the first 2 years of his career, and even in his big year, his breakout year last year, if you will, when he really started snapping, he even still missed 2 games. And the numbers that you bring up about his yards inside, his attempts inside the 5 or inside the red zone, I just don't know if that's sustainable. I mean, he had 6 all-purpose touchdowns in the first 15 games of his career. Then he scores 13 touchdowns in only 14 games last season. That doesn't seem sustainable to me. I think that he's due for some regression in that category. And I just don't want to bank on a top 5 running back who I don't really expect to play a full 16-game season. And then you bring in the concerns with the contract, and that still hasn't been resolved. Alexander Mattison had over 100 carries as a rookie. I think they're going to want to see how viable it is to move on, from Cook next year in a loaded class of free agent running backs that we'll have in 2021 and see if they need to chase that market or if Alexander Madison's good. So I think that Madison's work will go up this year and eat more into Cook's than it did prior. And I do like Cook. I've been coming around to him, especially with the concerns we have of Kenyon Drake's recent injury, and I haven't updated the rankings to reflect that. I do think that I could entertain the idea of moving both Cook and Henry above Kenyon Drake, who's currently in a walking boot right now at Cardinals camp, due to the concerns that brings. But even still, I just don't really see it, especially when it comes to the efficiency in yards per route run being 3rd, like you mentioned. I could see that coming down. Although one plus for Dalvin Cook that I will say is that with the departure of Stephon Diggs and all the targets that he had, perhaps with a really shaky group of wide receivers behind Adam Thielen and so much being anticipated upon first-round wide receiver Justin Jefferson, maybe that doesn't quite pan out starting right away week 1. Dalvin Cook could still see a very boosted percent of this team's targets. So, yeah, I guess it just comes down to A, injury prone, B, I'm bullish on Madison. I think he's really good, and I think the Vikings are going to want to see what they can get from him this year.
Yeah, I mean, those are valid arguments, but we've seen it that they want Dalvin Cook to be their workhorse role. As I mentioned, he had, over half the games that he played with 18 plus carries, and I'm pretty sure he hit the 20 touch mark in every game that he started besides maybe one. Not to mention, he averaged the best rushing yards per game with 118.1 yards per game out of any running back in the NFL, and had the fifth most total yards as well out of any running back in the NFL. He finished second in PPR fantasy points per game with 15 plus PPR points in 11 out of his 14 games. The Vikings are a run-first team. Even with Madison there getting 100 touches, Dalvin Cook still projects to see, I would say, 300 touches this year. We could see his receptions be boosted, like you mentioned, due to the departure of Stephon Diggs. So even if he loses, 15, 20 more attempts than he did last year, we could see those being added to his reception total. I wouldn't be surprised if he hits 70 catches this year. So I think Dalvin Cook is easily a top 5 running back for 2020. I would have him as my number 5, and I would boot Edwards-Helaire and Kenyon Drake down. The bottom half of this top 12 is good. I would have Miles Sanders, Nick Chubb, and Austin Eckler all in my top 12 if I was doing rankings personally. Like I mentioned before, I would have Derrick Henry higher than 8 and Dalvin Cook higher than 7. But I don't really disagree with the later half of this. I mean, I would probably put Nick Chubb above Eckler and Mixon. Nick Chubb was second in the NFL in rushing yards last year, and he was one of the highest rated running backs according to PFF last year. In a running back friendly scheme with Stefanski, who wants to run the ball a lot, had 1,400 plus rushing yards, even with Kareem Hunt vulturing all the pass down work, all the third down work. So, I mean, I would move Nick Chubb up a little bit personally, but I could get on board with him at 12.
Let's transition to the next guy, the RB2s on this list, and you'll see some names on this list that a lot of people would, suggest should be in the RB1 category, including guys like Aaron Jones and Josh Jacobs. So let's talk about these guys, some running backs from the range of 13 to 24, starting at 13, where I've got Todd Gurley, 14, David Johnson, much higher than consensus, and I'm sure we'll get to that. Melvin Gordon, Aaron Jones, James Conner, Josh Jacobs, all the way down at 18. 19, Jonathan Taylor. 20, Le'Veon Bell. 21, your boy, Leonard Fournette. 22, Devin Singletary. 23, Kareem Hunt. And finally, 24, this year's Alvin Kamara, DeAndre Swift. So how do you feel about these RB2s, if you will?
See, this is where we'll probably disagree the most. I wholeheartedly do not agree with any of your rankings in this tier. I will put that on record. I think Todd Gurley, David Johnson, and Melvin Gordon as your 13, 14, and 15th is disgusting. I think Aaron Jones should be above those guys. I think Josh Jacobs should be above those 3 guys. I think James Conner should be above those 3 guys. I think Leonard Fournette should be somewhere around the 15 to 16 range. And I mean, Todd Gurley at 13, I guess that's the first area of concern that I have. So what makes it concerning for me is that, there are reports that have came out today saying that he's going to average 15 to 25 touches a game. But the concern...
He would be an RB1 if that were true.
Yeah, but the concerns for me is, so Dirk Cutter, the offensive coordinator for Atlanta, has produced bottom 10 finishes in rushing yards 7 of his last 13 years. Okay, and 7 of those came in the last 8 years of him being a head coach. And I think that Todd Gurley, I'm sorry to say, he's past his prime. He's only 26 years old, but this man has arthritis in his knee. He was walking around with a limp at camp. they're limiting his reps, giving him load management, Kawhi Leonard style. Okay. They're giving this man load management in training camp where they didn't have to go through OTAs. They didn't have to go through the mini camps early in the season because of COVID. And I think it's important to remember that the Rams took a $20.15 million dead space cap hit to get rid of Todd Gurley this year. Do we think that, or I wouldn't say do we think, are we going to bet against Sean McVay and all of the people in the Rams front office that Todd Gurley is not the same, or he's the same player that we saw in 2018? I don't want to take that risk, so therefore I would not have him at 13, and I will not be drafting any Todd Gurley in the third round of best ball or redraft leagues. So that's my first problem. But
all right. Well, let me respond to that before we get into the rest, because I think Todd Gurley's a really interesting player that I think putting him at 13 has already really accounted for the downgrade and the worry around his knee. Because if you ask me, if I wasn't considering that, then he would be easily an RB1, easily a top 10 running back, because he's going into an absolutely elite offense with a ton of scoring potential. And even as arthritic and messed up as his knee is, the Rams still gave him, 250 touches last year? He had 12 touchdowns. Dude's had no less than 200 touches in a single season in his career, over 10 touchdowns in 80% of his seasons. 4 out of his 5 seasons. He
also averaged less than 4 yards per carry last year and had the least efficient year out of his whole entire career last season. And then they cut him.
And he could be inefficient and still produce 12 touchdowns in, an Atlanta offense that I would expect to be better than the 2019 Rams offense, which was kind of disappointing in a lot of ways. I mean, yeah, you could talk about Dirk Cutter and what he's done, and I would have to go back and specifically look, especially at some of the running backs they were dealing with in the Bucs team, but none of them were Todd Gurley types. I mean, last year he was running with a broken 30-year-old Devonta Freeman and Ito Smith. Please. Todd Gurley, yes, with the concerns, he's still only 26 years old, Joey. Only 26. And I don't see why, besides the knee, if the knee is totally gone, then this is a different conversation. But I'm just willing to risk it on the upside and what, theoretically is going to be one of the best offenses in the NFL this year, and absolutely no competition whatsoever behind him. So if they give him another 220 plus touches and he could sit in a decent reception range, and he's been a good receiving back at points. I mean, I don't think he's going to get 87, 81 targets like he did in 2017 and 2018 with the Rams. But I mean, even if he has what he had last year, around 50 targets, 30 receptions, add that to the possible touchdown upside, I don't see how he really finishes lower than an RB2 and probably a high-end RB2.
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll finish as a low-end RB2. I just would not have him ranked as a high-end RB2, almost an RB1 with all the concerns surrounding him. And then, like you mentioned, there is a lot of competition, for targets in Atlanta, and there's going to be a lot of mouths to feed, which could also hurt his touchdown upside. And I guess from my perspective, like if I'm ranking players, I'm not really going to bank on them scoring 10 touchdowns because, we've talked about it before, but touchdowns are the least predictable stat out there. He could score 6 touchdowns this year, or he could score 16. We just don't know. I mean, he does obviously he's in a good offense, but it has been historically a bad rushing offense. The Falcons have had one of the least efficient rushing attacks over the last 5 years. Combined with the fact that Todd Gurley was one of the worst pass-catching running backs by every metric last year. He had one of the highest drop rates at running backs last year in the NFL. So I just would not have him ranked at 13, but I guess that's enough of the Todd Gurley talk. We can go on to number 14, David Johnson, which is equally as worse because David Johnson is washed, straight up.
Seems like that's a pretty hefty and definitive statement on a guy who had one bad year.
David Johnson has had multiple bad seasons. Realistically, he's only had one great year, and that was 5 years ago, right? He just looked like a sloth last year. Maybe that was because of his ankle and back injury, so I will say that. But having him as your running back 14, it could either pan out and, you could look like a genius. But I think realistically he finishes as a back end RB2. I'm just a believer that, he's past his prime. He's 27 years old. He's going to be 28 soon. And the only thing that I could see going for him is that Bill O'Brien uses a bell cow running back. So ever since Bill O'Brien was hired in 2014, at least one running back on the Texans has seen over 200 carries and 16 targets total, except for 2015 when Arian Foster was injured for 12 games. So that's the only thing that, could potentially help him reach RB14 is the fact that Bill O'Brien is a complete donkey and will give David Johnson 250 touches probably instead of playing Duke Johnson, who, should be the starting running back in Houston.
To be honest, I mean, they gave a 28-year-old Carlos Hyde 245 carries and only 10 receptions. I mean, say David Johnson gets 220, 30 carries on the ground and 30 receptions, 40 receptions. I think his ceiling could be around 45 to 50. I mean, that's locked in RB1, and he's in a much better offense than he was last year. I mean, this Texans offense is going to be better than the first year of Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray as a rookie. It will be. And I just don't – I understand the argument that maybe he's washed, but I'm just not ready to write him off. Like, his age, he's still in an age where running backs can put up prime years. And he has shown a ceiling that maybe – 4 or 5 other running backs in the entire NFL have shown to this point. He's not old. And yeah, I mean, if they're going to give a guy like Carlos Hyde, who even at his best, is not worth half of what David Johnson is at his best, then I think Johnson coming in to completely replace that role is going to just blow him out of the water. And Duke Johnson is honestly not really a threat. I mean, he's good in the role that he's in, but Duke Johnson is, closer to a, theoretic James White type running back than he is to anybody who's going to be a real threat to a bell cow. He's a role player at best.
Yeah, I mean, Duke Johnson is the better running back at this point in their careers, but that's a debate for another time. I mean, David Johnson is just washed. Carlos Hyde finished as the running back 30 last year. So if David Johnson, gets a couple more catches than Carlos Hyde, I could see him finishing as RB20, RB21.
Duke Johnson's had more than 100 rush attempts once in his career.
Yeah, he hasn't been used in his career in the NFL. And
he never will be.
Because coaches are donkeys. Coaches are donkeys.
I mean, even so, we got to look at what teams will do, not what we think they should do. And there's no evidence to support Duke Johnson will ever have more than 100 rushing attempts ever for the duration of his career. And yeah, I mean, maybe David Johnson wasn't quite as elite as he was in the early years, even 2 years ago, but still we're talking about a season where he touched the ball, 258 times on the ground for almost 1,000 yards and had 50 receptions. So I don't quite think he's washed coming off of a year where he was never really healthy in a scheme that didn't fit him.
Okay.
What else you got for me?
Yeah, so, I mean, Melvin Gordon at 15, I think that's way too high for him. I think he should be, max running back 20. I mean, we've seen reports come out saying that the Broncos aren't going to have a designated starting running back. Phillip Lindsay and Melvin Gordon are going to be splitting the work. And Melvin Gordon's best fantasy asset throughout his whole career has been his touchdown upside, right? He's never been a prolific, between the tackles runner. He's never averaged, he's averaged over 4 yards per carry in an entire season in 1 year out of his entire career, which is abysmal, I will say. He's never topped 1,000 yards except for one season, and that season was the season where he averaged over 4 yards per carry. So this isn't a
997. Let's keep it a
Hey, that's not over 1,000. So he's not going to get you 1,000 yards on the ground this year. That's a fact.
Okay.
He's not going to get you 40 to 50 catches. He could, because Philip Lindsay isn't really much of a catching back, but I think 40 to 50 is Melvin Gordon's ceiling. So having him above a guy like Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, Leonard Fournette, James Conner, I think that's just a clear cut, misranking. I don't see the Melvin Gordon being at 15. I just don't see it.
Well, let me say this. One, I don't think that the numbers you said completely tell the Melvin Gordon story, because maybe he didn't have over 1,000 yards, but I mean, in 3 straight years from 2016 to 2018, he had over 1,300 total yards. I mean, this guy was adding over 400 yards receiving each and every year. I mean, he's an accomplished receiving back. I feel like that gets underlooked. I mean, 2018, he had 50 receptions for almost 500 yards, and he missed 4 games in that season. So I'm not going to say that 40 to 50 receptions is his ceiling. I mean, he hasn't had under 40 receptions in a single year in the last 4 years. So I think that that's more like his floor realistically. I'm not worried about Philip Lindsay. I don't think that Philip Lindsay is going to eat into what he can do as a receiver more than Austin Eckler did, who's arguably top 5 receiving back in the NFL. Actually, he is a top 5 receiving back in the NFL. So, I mean, perhaps the touchdowns come down. That's a valid argument. And I hear what you're saying. Like, I do think that you can make the argument I should push Aaron Jones and even James Conner above him. It's kind of a tier where I look at these guys in a similar fashion, but definitely not a guy like Josh Jacobs, whose receiving ceiling is like 25 receptions. So absolutely not. Absolutely.
I mean, we can get into the Josh Jacobs talk. I know that you just put out a video talking about it on Drafters Fantasy, which the viewers can go and watch that if they're interested in hearing you talk about Josh Jacobs and how he is the worst pick in the first 2 rounds, which I also disagree with. I think he is a solid pick, but that's because Josh Jacobs is just talented. He's a talented running back in the NFL. 262 total touches last year. Will say 242 rushing attempts, only had 20 catches. He had 1,100 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns, right? Now, let's just go back to the Clyde Edwards-Helaire talk, and I want to hear what you said about DeAndre Washington and Darrell Williams. Does that same argument coincide with the argument that Theo Riddick is a bum, Jalen Richard is a bum? Who else did they sign? Or they drafted Lynn Bowden, a player who's not a running back that they're trying to convert into a running back. Because I know that's going to be your argument for his pass catching numbers to be low this year, when John Gruden and Mike Mayock have came out publicly and said that this man is going to be the bell cow and he's going to be more involved in the passing game. So I just want to see if your arguments line up.
Well, they do, especially considering you're comparing apples to oranges, because Clyde Edwards-Helaire's, one of his biggest strengths is his pass catching acumen, and
his only strength.
One of Josh Jacobs' biggest, issues is the fact that he is not a pass catcher, and even in a year where
why isn't he a pass catcher though?
Role, because the Raiders had no desire to use him that way. And I don't see why that's going to change. I mean, this is pure coach speak if I've ever seen it a day in my life. And there's maybe a short list of 5 coaches in the NFL whose words mean absolutely nothing to me. And Gruden is top of the list. This dude is king of capping. Nothing he says about a player means anything to me, because it's pure cap. And
is it?
Another difference.
Hold on. You said the same thing about Darren Waller last year when John Gruden was hyping him up. So I would tread lightly.
One time. And let's be honest, Edwards-Helaire again was drafted specifically in part because of what he does as a receiver. Josh Jacobs, like you said, he had all this work last year and they didn't use him at all in that way. And like Jalen Richard, Theo Riddick, Devontae Booker, and Lynn Bowden, no, none of them are great running backs. Yes, Josh Jacobs is the most talented running back in the group, but unless you're playing in a PPT, points per talent league, which I don't think anybody is, great that's going to do you, him being as talented as he wants. Darrell Henderson is as talented as he wants. Doesn't matter if you're not getting the opportunity. And Josh Jacobs is not going to see a spike in his targets. I'm sorry. All 4 of those guys are essentially pass catching specialists. None of them are going to be eating into his workload on the ground. So Josh Jacobs to me is similar to Nick Chubb, where, yeah, he's a talented guy, but he's only going to have first and second down work, and his upside is going to come from touchdown scoring. And I just don't view the Raiders offense as an offense that's going to produce, a running back who can lead the NFL in touchdowns or be in the top 5, because I don't really look at that offense as being that explosive. I mean, they've got a ton of, they've got a ton invested in their rookies. So if that pans out, that'll help them. But this isn't really the year to be, betting on a ton of influx of rookies. And Derek Carr, who his coaches are frustrated because he just only dumps off. He doesn't look down the field. How much is that really going to open up what Josh Jacobs can do with the addition of Ruggs and Edwards? I just don't see it. I just don't see it whatsoever. I think that, taking him even ahead of guys like Le'Veon Bell is semi-suspect. I've got him ranked above it because Bell's a bum on a bad offense, but I mean, at least he's going to get 60 catches. That's 3 times what we could realistically expect from Josh Jacobs. So, yeah, I'm all good on the Josh Jacobs. If I'm wrong, I mean,
yeah, I think
that's fine. But
I think you're definitely wrong on Josh Jacobs. I mean, he's just the most talented running back on the roster, and his talent will shine through, I believe. And you can't say somebody's not a pass catching back if their coaches don't want to use them in that facet. Maybe he just wasn't ready to take on that extra role in the passing game last year. Who knows? But I mean, I'm going to believe the coaches that are around these guys every day. And, if we use the same argument that Darwin Thompson and DeAndre Washington and Darrell Williams aren't factors to Clyde Edwards-Helaire role in the Chiefs offense, then I'm not going to, assume that Theo Riddick, Lynn Bowden, and Devontae Booker. Why are we talking about Devontae Booker in 2020? That's what I want to know. I'm not going to assume that any of those bona fide scrubs are a threat to this dude's workload. Talent-wise, he's a top 10 running back in the NFL. I will say that, but we can move on.
The last thing I'll say is, I forget who you mentioned a minute ago about being in like a workload control program. I mean, they're giving Josh Jacobs designated days off because of his shoulder still. So that is something to monitor that nobody's even talking about. But he's literally getting, respite periods because of the shoulder that he played through an injury with that, at the time people were saying, maybe you shouldn't play through this because it could damage your future outlooks. And we'll see how that plays out. But we can continue. Do you want to maybe hit on Lenny Fournette? I know that's somebody we disagreed on all off season.
Yeah, it's just another running back that I feel like you have too low on the list. Like I mentioned earlier, I would have him, around the running back 15, 16 spot. So I would move him up about 5 spots just because I feel like if he gets 300 touches this year, which I would project for him to get, I think he's one of, probably 10, 11 running backs in the NFL this season that'll hit 300 touches. There's no shot that he finishes lower than the RB20 with 300 touches. I mean, even if that comes with 20 catches, if you have 300 touches, there's probably a good chance that you're going to finish in the top 20. So that's why I would have him above the ranking that you have him, even though, he's on a bad team and a bad offense. I think he's just going to be used as a workhorse, and workhorses score fantasy points. So,
yeah, that's fair. I mean, I've got him around Le'Veon Bell, who's a workhorse. Same situation, bad team. It's just give me the receiving work. That's kind of how I look at it, to be honest. And I've got him above guys who I think have potentially higher upside, especially in receiving roles in like Singletary, Hunt, and Swift. But yeah, the carries are worth something. So I just don't see anybody on the list who I think you could put him above because, Jonathan Taylor, only a matter of time.
David Johnson, Melvin Gordon, Todd Gurley, he's above all of them.
I mean, he's going to have, they'll all have more catches, and they're all in better offenses, frankly.
Yeah, but I feel like you're catches are important. But I think Leonard Fournette will still have 40 catches this year, even with Chris Thompson there. Leonard Fournette is their workhorse running back. He's their 3-down running back. Chris Thompson will be the change of pace running back. Obviously, if he stays healthy for the entire year, Leonard Fournette he won't get 70 catches again. But I would still project for him to get around 40 catches. And then with this positive touchdown regression incoming, Leonard Fournette will easily be close to a running back one this year, in my opinion. So.
Fair enough. I'm comfortable being off the Uncle Lenny bandwagon in what I think everybody agrees is a career year in terms of workload, but perhaps I am wrong. Is there anybody else you want to hit on in this segment of players?
No, I think this the end of this range is fine personally, but in the next tier there is one guy that we need to talk about.
All right, let's get to it then. Running backs 25 through 36. Real quick before I talk about that, I just want to say Kareem Hunt and DeAndre Swift have the absolute upside to win you your league. Two of my favorite guys to draft in that 5th, 6th round range if you can get them. But moving on to the RB3s of the world, 25 through 36, I've got Tariq Cohen, 25, David Montgomery, 26, James White, 27, Chris Carson, 28, Ronald Jones, 29, Cam Akers at 30, Mostert, 31, Dobbins, 32, Kerryon, 33, Mark Ingram at 34, Howard, 35, and finally, Tevin Coleman at 36.
Yeah, so a solid list of guys in this tier, and the one running back that I want to hit on specifically that I think does not belong in this tier and that you're absolutely disrespecting is Chris Carson. The fact that you have guys like Tariq Cohen, David Montgomery, and James White ranked above Chris Carson is laughable. I'm sorry, Ben. It's laughable.
Okay.
Chris Carson has averaged 96.9 yards per game over the past 2 seasons, which ranks 8th best in the NFL, and he scored 9 touchdowns in each season. 1,100 plus rushing yards in each of the last 2 seasons, and he's your running back 28. They ran at a rate of 45.7% in 2019, which ranks 6th in the NFL. Okay. When it comes down to it, only 2 running backs have averaged 1,100 rushing yards and 9 total touchdowns for the past 2 years. Chris Carson and Zeke. Chris Carson is the workhorse in Seattle. He's going to get 20 touches a game, and you have him at your running back 28 below guys like Tariq Cohen. What are we doing here? Come on, bro.
Yeah, I mean, Tariq Cohen has 80 catch upside.
Yeah, Tariq Cohen had 73 catches last year, right? He had 73 catches last year, and he finished as the running back 27. What are we talking about?
Bad touchdown year though. Look at his numbers from 2 years ago when he was scoring all those touchdowns.
We're not in the business of projecting touchdowns. We're in the business of projecting workload. While Tariq Cohen, he does have 80 catch upside, he's going to be on one of the worst offenses in the NFL that hasn't even picked their starting quarterback, and the season starts in 2 weeks. What are we doing here? Chris Carson is the workhorse running back on a team that wants to run the ball, on a team that uses him as, the main back. They don't want to use anybody else besides Chris Carson.
That's fair. I mean, Chris Carson is coming off of an injury that took him out at the end of last year. Chris Carson, as much as the point that you're making about his workload is valid, I mean, just to bring up Tariq Cohen, I don't know why he's the guy in the segment we're comparing to because they're totally different. But Cohen, only averaged 0.9 less of a fantasy point per game in his 2018 season compared to Chris Carson's season last year. So I don't think the difference between these guys is that prolific. And, I don't know. I don't look at Chris Carson as a guy who is just so good that he's going to fend off all competition. Like, yeah, he is definitely the guy there. He is the guy there. But they signed Carlos Hyde. They were going to sign Devonta Freeman if he was cheaper. They've been talking about adding running backs all year. They've still got Rashad Penny, who's got first-round draft capital. They've got DJ Dallas, who they invested in this year. I just don't know if we can just automatically assume Chris Carson to be a guy who's going to maintain the workload that he's maintained this entire time. Chris Carson is one of those guys who, kind of like a Jordan Howard to me, where he continually finds himself in a situation where he has a very steady workload, almost no receiving role, and benefits just from the workload opposed to the talent. And I'm not the talent guy, so if he has the workload, I'll give it to him. I'll give it up to him. But I just think that this year, more so than perhaps last year, his workload is a little less secure coming off the injury and with the team dedicated to really, altering the personnel in that running back room.
Yeah, I don't really put much stock into Carlos Hyde or fourth round pick DJ Dallas. And we can note that Rashad Penny is going to miss the first 6 games of the season as he had complications with his torn ACL. So in my eyes, he's the running back there. He's the workhorse. He's going to see 20-plus touches a game with some reception upside. Chris Carson at 28, I feel like is just wrong. I feel like that's too low for his workload. You know, you can question his talent. You can question the running back room. But it's about, what are the coaches going to do? Like you just said like 10 minutes ago, what are the coaches going to do? Not what we think is going to happen. And Pete Carroll is going to feed that man the ball. The Seahawks are a running team. They want to run the ball, and Chris Carson is a guy, and he's not going to finish below James White, Tariq Cohen, David Montgomery. I just don't see how that's possible without an injury. So
that's all fair, but the real question isn't whether he's going to finish above those guys because he's being drafted in an entirely different tier. I mean, his ADP on Underdog is 31 even, and he's going ahead of Jonathan Taylor, Todd Gurley, your boy Fournette, Gordon, Le'Veon Bell, like David Johnson. Those are the guys you have to draft him.
I'd put him above all those guys. I personally would.
No.
Above
Todd Gurley, above Jonathan Taylor.
I guess. You like drafting washed up running backs. I think that's what we can take away from this video. That
Chris Carson's never been washed on.
Chris Carson is a good running back. Like I said, over 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns the last 2 years in a workhorse role. And he's your running back 28 behind guys who aren't even going to sniff 200 touches.
I guess Chris Carson is.
All I know is there needs to be an updating to these rankings after this video, and Chris Carson needs to be in your top 20.
That's fair. I'll think about it. I just don't necessarily see what really differentiates him from Jordan Howard down at 35, except being on a better team. But sure. Does anything else stand out to you on this list?
In this tier, I mean, this is obviously when you see the clear-cut drop-off in drafts with Raheem Mostert and Kerryon Johnson, Mark Ingram, Jordan Howard, some guys that have no receiving upside and, they have, minimal rushing upside as well. I mean, Mostert probably has the most upside out of the guys that I just mentioned. But he didn't rush the ball more than 14 times in a single game for San Francisco in the regular season last year. So not too high on him. But other than that, this is a tier that I want to stay away from besides Chris Carson, who shouldn't be in this tier.
Let me ask you a philosophical question. How do you feel about guys who are, in this tier, guys like, say, Kerryon Johnson, Mark Ingram, Jordan Howard, Tevin Coleman, guys who we know definitively have a role week to week, but it's not going to be the type of role that is going to blow your fantasy season up. It's not going to be a league-winning week, opposed to some of the guys that I've got ranked in the next tier, guys like Alexander Mattison, Zach Moss, Tony Pollard, Chase Edmonds, Latavius Murray, guys whose roles are very questionable on a week-to-week basis / non-existent, but have the upside to win your league if the guy in front of them goes down. How do you value that difference? The safety of a guy like Ingram or Howard who are going to get their touches on a week-to-week basis versus guys who, if the situation hits right, could win you your league. How do you attack that on draft day?
Yeah, on draft day, I'm solely focusing on the guys in the next tier over, the guys like Mark Ingram, Jordan Howard, just because I'm always shooting for that upside. I always want that league winning potential on my team. Obviously floor in redraft is important, but I feel like these guys' floors are low as well as their ceilings. So I might as well just target the guy with the higher ceiling and even, maybe even a lower floor. But yeah, the next tier is where stuff gets interesting for me.
And we can touch on this tier. I think after that, we'll leave the rest of the rankings for the people to go and find for themselves on the DFSdose.com. But I will close out this video here with the running backs 4, and we've already talked about a few of them. But from 37 to 48, I've got, really starting with these elite, potentially RB1 handcuffs and Alexander Mattison, Zach Moss, Tony Pollard, Chase Edmonds, Latavius Murray, Marlon Mack at 42, the current starter of the Indianapolis Colts for however long that lasts, Matt Breida at 43, Darrell Henderson 44, Nyheim Hines 45, Gibson 46, Damian Harris 47, and Sony Michel right behind him at 48. I will admit right now that I do need to update these rankings and put Damian Harris much higher. I actually think that I would put him right in the mix of that tier of guys like Madison and Moss, because I think that he is quite possibly the best Patriots running back to own as of right now. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think he should be higher, especially with the reports coming out of training camp that essentially he's been the best Patriots player on offense, the best Patriots running back. He's catching the ball well. He's obviously running the ball well in Patriots camp. And he looks to be the starter week 1. So, I mean, I was capitalizing on Damian Harris back in June and July in the 17th, 18th round of best ball drafts. Now his ADP has rose to round 12, round 11.
Yeah, that's pretty standard to see him go in that range. I mean, his ADP on Underdog is 133, so you're looking at him right around the 11th round.
Yeah, so 11th round, even see him fall in the 10th round sometimes. So yeah, I think he should be higher, but that's, just because of what has happened over Patriots camp in the last couple of days. But other than that, I think the top tier of these guys with Madison, Zach Moss, Tony Pollard, Chase Edmonds, I think those are the clear-cut best handcuffs to own besides Kareem Hunt, who I wouldn't really consider a handcuff at this point. But yeah, out of those 4 guys, I think Tony Pollard would be my number 1 for me personally, and then I would have Madison and then Chase Edmonds. That's how I would rank them. Just because of the roles that those players would have if their starters were to ever miss time. But I think those guys are the guys that could potentially win you best ball leagues and even redraft leagues.
I agree with you on that point. And if we're ranking in terms of upside, I would have both Pollard and Edmonds a little bit higher. I just have Madison and Moss ranked higher because I think they will legitimately have some week-to-week value as well, albeit probably limited based on the other guys on those teams, Madison especially. But I think that they have some slight week-to-week value and also extreme value if either Singletary or Dalvin Cook were ever to go out. So that's why I've got those guys there. But I think that's really all we need to hit on at this point. Maybe one last point, Joey. Do you want to get your Antonio Gibson hate off before we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, it's just I think having him as running back 46 like you do is fair. I just don't agree with drafting him in the 7th round. And I think as a consensus, you're lower on Antonio Gibson, which I would agree with, and I think is the right play, especially with Bryce Love, who you have ranked at 61, which the viewers can go and look on the website. But yeah, with Bryce Love there, and then obviously Adrian Peterson, I think a lot of experts are overvaluing Antonio Gibson and the projected role that he's going to have for the Washington football team this year. So, running back 46 isn't bad because that is lower than the consensus. But I just don't see him going, in the 7th round. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I'm with you wholeheartedly. I loved scooping Antonio Gibson up in best ball drafts, early offseason drafts, April, May. He was a 14th, 15th round pick. I loved that value for the potential upside as a receiver he offers on that team with, pretty sparse amount of targets to, players who command targets to go around outside of Terry McLaurin and Logan Thomas, who's developing. But yeah, I like Antonio Gibson, but not that much. And we've done a couple of drafts recently. One of them you can find on our YouTube channel right now where we were on Underdog and Gibson went in the 7th round. And on a podcast draft we did, he went in the 7th round. If that's his price, that's going to be a full fade for me, across the board. But yeah, like I said, guys, you can find all of my rankings. I ranked my top 65 running backs on the website, so you can find that at thedfsdose.com along with all of my positional rankings. We've got 2 more videos after this coming dedicated to wide receivers and tight ends. You can find the quarterback video already published on this YouTube channel. Joey said it at the top of the show. We really appreciate any, new subscribers. Like the video, comment below, agree with Joey. Tell me why I'm bugging with these rankings. Love to hear the feedback. And I think there are a couple changes that I might make after this video. Joey made some valid points. So you can peep the website and find out where those changes materialized. Can't speak today. But that's going to be it for us, guys. And we'll be back very soon on this YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out the DFS Dose podcast on every podcast platform. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, Podcast Addict, everywhere, every single Thursday. So don't miss out on that.